Hey everybody, welcome to a new episode of Walk in Faith. I'm excited to be sitting down with Carlos Garcia, who's an attorney and Army Reserve, a JAG officer, which is exciting in itself, senior trial defense counsel, where he defends soldiers who are facing military charges. He's also a certified Army resilience trainer, coaching soldiers and leaders on tools to stay calm and resilient under pressure. And he's also the co-founder of True Progress Lab. And Carlos and I, we spoke the other day, fascinating conversation. I said, we have to do a walk in faith because your story is just, it's really inspiring. And I can't get over the fact that you do multiple 50-mile marathons, which is exciting. So, Carlos, thank you so much for this opportunity to sit down with you.
Glad to be here, Craig. Right, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So tell me a little bit about your background because not everyone's familiar with your story, but give me a little bit about the background and how you decided, why you decided to create your program.
Yeah, so I'm originally from California. I come from blue collar parents, and first to go to college, first to go to law school. I was good on paper, right? I was getting the grades and everything, but deep down inside, I had this haunting of what people might know as imposter syndrome, right? This feeling of not being good enough, of thinking I'm not good enough, like I don't belong in certain rooms. And, I did a lot of over preparing, a lot of overthinking, a lot of hesitation, a lot of self doubt, a lot of avoiding, right? It's like a safety behavior. We build from this perception of threat that we think something bad is going to happen. So that causes us to avoid. And that's what happened to me. I avoided a lot of things. And then I learned what imposter syndrome was actually about. And there's this quote from this guy. His name is Alfred Adler. He's a 20th century psychologist, and he once said, "All problems are interpersonal problems." Right? So, in other words, if there weren't people around to do the thing we're scared of doing, we wouldn't have these feelings of inadequacy or feelings of not being good enough, right? Because there's nobody around. I.e., it's this fear of being negatively judged,
Mm.
negatively perceived, right? Also known as something called FOPO, fear of people's opinions. And so I learned that this was my issue, right? And that I was focusing so much outward on external things, on external outcomes, things I wasn't in control of, instead of focusing inward, things I was in control of, like my mind, my thoughts, my emotions, my actions, right? And so I missed a lot of things, right? I missed a lot of opportunities. In law school, I didn't raise my hand. I got invited to important events with senior executives, with senior government officials. I either ghosted them or I said no. I got invited to teach at my law school. I ghosted that opportunity. I missed so many opportunities. I drove Uber after law school because I didn't take the chances I needed to take despite having good grades, right? And I shrunk myself in meetings, for example. That's another example. So I had this realization that one day, enough was enough. I needed to reflect. I needed to understand what was going on. And I understood that I needed to train my mind, my nervous system, to be able to handle pressures because there's always going to be pressure. There's always going to be stress. Life is going to get harder as you move up the ladder, right? And so you're either going to get stronger and more able to deal with those pressures of life, or you're going to get weaker, right? And also being a father, being a father played a major role in understanding like you need to get your stuff in order,
Mhm.
man. You need to understand what's going on. And so I started delving into research. I started reading a bunch of things, psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, religion, Christianity, Stoicism. I started engaging in combat sports, jujitsu, judo, ultra running,
Wow.
putting myself under the fire. I became a certified Army resilience trainer, teaching the things that I learned and that the Army taught me to other soldiers, to other leaders in the Army. I started to intentionally humiliate myself because one of the fears that I had that is a variation of fear of judgment is fear of failing or fear of looking silly or fear of looking foolish. And so we need to understand that this is a sense of feeling or fearing humiliation, right? And it was important for me to understand and be okay with looking foolish, with okay with looking silly, right? So exposing myself to these types of emotions and creating the type of identity I like to call identity expanding experiences to rewire my fears and anxieties at the core, at the source, and essentially building proof of my capabilities, proof that I'm that guy, right? That I can do hard things, and understanding that I needed to create my capacity for stress, increase my capacity for stress, not just make it go away by reducing the anxiety or trying to avoid it, but sitting in it and realizing that I'm not going to die and that I can tolerate these things, and training my mind to understand that there is nothing to fear from the beginning, right? We're still breathing. Stress is always going to be there. It's about learning to be okay with discomfort, right? And so what that journey led me was doing all those things and then realizing that it's okay, right? So saying yes more to opportunities, not shying away from opportunities, no longer unconsciously taming my ambition, right? Because whether we realize it or not, we have this instinctual habit of seeing somebody and saying, "Oh, that's not for me,"
Mm-hmm.
versus switching our mindset and saying, "What if?" Right? And that is a variant essentially of unconsciously quenching our ambition, right? And in order to flip that switch, we need to realize that everybody has the potential, everybody has that fire, everybody has that dragon, that fighter inside of them, but they need the right training ground, the right vehicle, the right tools to unleash that, right? To unleash that fighter inside of them. And so I think, I'm a Catholic. I think we're all gonna die, and my purpose is to touch people. One person. If I can touch one person, that I've done my job, right? That keeps me grounded, because it's important to believe that things are gonna get better. I always give the example of the stock market. Behind every trough, there's gonna be a peak, right? The sun is gonna rise. The sun is gonna rise, right? And so I started True Progress Lab from this journey, right? And I like to say helping people become anti-humiliated, which essentially means fear of judgment, so that people can lead, people can serve, people can create without that fear of judgment getting in the way. Because I believe that nobody should have to be held back, right? By this fear. Nobody should have to be unconsciously held back by this fear, right?
Carlos, you said so many things, and as you're speaking, my mind is just going. First of all,
Yeah,
the imposter syndrome is this to me. I was never familiar with that term, and we spoke about this off camera though. But to
right,
me, it's that voice of the enemy that comes at 2 o'clock in the morning last night, woke me up and said, you're not good enough. If only people find out the truth. These voices,
right.
and I have to remind myself of all. First of all, I'm a child of God, right? I'm made in the image of Christ, but also to that all of the accomplishments, and it's like this constant battle. But I always try to figure out, especially for me, and there's this, I forgot the exact term, but it's like, before you wake up, where I'm able to really tap into, I forgot the exact word, but you're able to tap into your past. And I always try to align and say, well, why do I act or feel a certain way? Why am I afraid? Where did these negative emotions come from? Were you able to ever identify where this all started? Was it, I mean, I'm assuming you came from a loving family just from this conversation, but maybe you didn't. Like, there are people that can go back and say, this is the one thing that took place in my life that led me to feel this way or a certain way. Were you able to identify why you had this fear of this imposter syndrome, we'll call it?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of my upbringing. Not because the problem often is not being exposed enough to experiences that build the type of evidence-based thoughts to create the kind of proof and self-belief and self-trust that you need in order to take the necessary risks, in order to be bold enough to put yourself in those situations, because it can be scary, right? But it takes a certain level of competence and confidence to then create the kind of space, because now you have a certain level of self-trust in yourself, to then being able to take those bold actions and those risks, right? And for me, it was about not being exposed to enough challenges whereby I was able to create those self beliefs.
Do you have
You
any
know,
siblings? Are you an only child?
I have a brother. Yeah, I have a brother, older brother. And I would say uh, he was sort of in the same boat, I would say, right? He was sort of in the same boat. So it's about creating the type of experiences to create that self belief.
Interesting. I mean, like you said too, we all have the ability, we all have that fire within us, and then at some point
Yeah.
we're able to one, like you said, we're taught, right? I mean, fight or flight, but my mind teaches me to stop when I feel pain, stop when I feel any sort of anxiety, depression issues, right? And we know the 40% rule. So whenever I hear of aggression, anxiety, it's like my body is trying to keep me away from that. But in actuality, how do we grow is by overcoming that adversity because
Yeah.
most of the time too the pain that we think or the issues that we think are going to arise, they never take place, and sometimes internally we actually hope and pray that those things actually take place to validate our inaction because
Yeah.
we don't want to prove to ourselves that nothing was going to happen. But then also too, it's the fear of success. How many of us we sabotage our own, whether it's a relationship or like in your case, you ghosted all these opportunities because it's like we are afraid of success, right? It's so much easier to just stay in this level of comfort. And that's what you're teaching people, that they can overcome adversity, they can overcome challenges. And when you were able to help people, whether it was, through marathons or like you mentioned to me off camera, about people actually humiliating themselves, like you've seen beyond growth. Like, tell me some of the success stories and some of your clients that you were able to really help.
Yeah. So the first guy who comes to mind, we'll call him John. So John was a habitual avoider. He was a habitual overthinker, right? He is a mid-level manager and entrepreneur, and he just wanted something very simple. He wanted to stop running away from the opportunities that were just lying right in front of him to just snatch and take and seize. And the number one thing we did was help him get clarity, help him build his what we call personal constitution, his ethos, because I found that we can create all the habits and behaviors and actions, but if they're not aligned with the person you know yourself to be, if the story you tell yourself about yourself is not the right story, any actions or behaviors or habits you try to build is not going to last, right? It's going to be temporary. So it's necessary to get that story right. Who does he want to be? Why is he doing what he's doing? And then layering that over with what we call exposure challenges. So gradually facing the things he's scared of doing, right? So for in his case, it was cold calling, inviting people for coffee, intentionally humiliating himself because he had this fear of looking silly, right?
Mm.
So we need to understand that looking silly, it's okay. Nothing's going to happen. Like you were just saying moments ago, we need to understand, train the amygdala, the mind, the nervous system to understand that the thing you think is going to happen, that worst case scenario you think is going to happen, 9 times out of 10, it's not going to happen, right? And if it does happen, guess what? You're still breathing. You're still alive, right? And so he's closer to God. He's very religious, closer. He's been able to get closer to God, more friends, more leads for his business. And I'm super, super proud of him, because his outlook, it's about changing that mindset from, oh, that's not for me to, what if, what if I try this? What if I can do this, right? And that's beautiful to see, beautiful to watch.
Oh, I mean, I would literally, it's funny because I just did a daily devotional and it was about exactly what we're talking about. And, I talk to people all the time, just like you. And
Yeah,
how many people that are a little bit older, like right now we're still young, so we have time on our side, but there are people that are
right.
a lot older that if only I would have done things differently, and this
Uh,
sense of regret. And how many people I interview and they lack this sense of fulfillment, this sense of peace. And I remember even my dad, even my mother's 80. And the other day I was practicing, I was trying to do a TED talk, right? And I'm asking her a question. She said, I always wanted to be a teacher. And she's 80 now. And I said, well, what happened? I didn't think
yeah,
I was smart enough. And she
uh,
had this sense of regret at 80. I
yeah,
wasn't smart enough. And someone, might have said something to her and just really put her in this situation where she didn't feel she was good enough. And she
yeah,
lived with this regret. And she said
yeah,
now at 80, as she teaches CCD, she said, I finally found my purpose and my fulfillment. and she's 80. And so we look back and we say, if only she would have done things differently. But we have that opportunity to really make those changes. But there are so many people that, like you said, they either sabotage, they ghost, they don't feel they're adequate enough. There's all
Yeah,
these reasons, this the lies that the enemy, the imposter syndrome, that
yeah,
sort of puts us in a direction and leads us into a place that God never intended. God wants us to live the best life. And whatever that is, it doesn't always mean monetary, it doesn't mean success to the standards of society, but like you said earlier, helping one person, right? Giving people
yeah,
hope, inspiring people. That's what it's about. I
yeah,
mean, but you've done extraordinary things. I mean, when you told me you ran, I was telling my wife this morning, 50-mile marathon. Like when you said that to me, right away my mind says it's impossible. I could never do that. Where
yeah,
does that thought come from? But then also too, like we know the 40% rule. When my mind says that, and it probably happened to you when you're at mile 29 or 30, and it says, you can't do this, Carlos. What
yeah.
did you lean on?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Craig. So, starting ultra running, one of the big motivators is for me is when I do my morning rituals. I do it like every day, every other day. I always like to review. One of the things I like to review is my story. I review my new story, the person I'm becoming, and my old story, the person I no longer want to be like. And I remember every time I'm training for my ultras, and I'm waking up early in the morning, I got to do those 4 hour runs on Sunday, be away from my family. I always think about that old story. Am I the person who's going to continue being like this? Or am I the person who does these types of things, who does things even though it's hard, who does things he hates to do but knows he has to do them to get to where he wants to get? If I can do these types of things, then it's going to be transferable to other areas of my life, right? That's why I like to do these sort of physical activities, because it helps eliminate the variables of other people, and it's just you, the road, your thoughts, your emotions. And to your other question about how do you get through those last miles? So it's usually the last 10, 15 miles, right? That's when I need to really be in the zone, when I like to be, when I block everything out and it's just me and my pain. And I try not to run away or decrease the level of pain I'm feeling. I try to just tell myself it's just pain. It's just pain. It's just pain. It's just pain. Pain is temporary, right? Pain is temporary. And then I tell myself my negative story. I just keep repeating my negative story over and over, over, over again on repeat. And I get into almost this transcendental state, right? I'll play one song in my headphones, and I'll just be playing that song for hours, repeating my story, and repeating the fact that pain is just pain.
Mm.
That
And
helps me.
it's okay. So now I'm in your zone. I'm running.
Yeah,
That voice comes first. It starts off where it says, why are you doing this? It's not worth it. Then it becomes
yeah,
the pain. Then it becomes the long-term damage. And then it becomes your children can lose their father, right? Because that voice gets
yeah,
stronger and louder and louder. And
yeah,
you're able to identify that voice that it's a lie. So
yeah,
what are when you get to mile 40 and your body is, you are really in pain.
yeah.
What kind of thoughts are coming? How do you combat those thoughts?
I have to understand. It comes with practice too, understanding how much you can, because you don't want to be negligent, right? You need to understand your body and do it enough times to understand whether you're in actual danger and close to death versus when you're feeling increased amounts of pain, right? So it's necessary to understand that. And when I realize that I'm not going to die and that it's just pain, that's when I make sure that I have the song that I play on repeat for hours and the story that I continue to tell myself over and over again.
It's amazing.
And that's what
And
I do. And that's it. It's that simple. It's not magic.
no, but it's inspiring because, like I told you, we're working on this documentary where Lou's name's Lou, and he was
Yeah,
able to punch the bag for 33 hours straight. And he's going for 55.
that's
And,
crazy.
we debate because he's like, with the 40% rule, and I'm able to overcome it. It's all in your mind and it's the pain. And I say, I don't think I could do it. But I don't think I could do it because I don't think God has called me to do it. But do I think I can do it if I had a strong enough why? Yes. There are certain things that I do just like you do that other people look at and say, how could you do that? Could I
Yeah,
sit here 14 hours straight talking to people? Oh, yeah. I mean, I've
Yeah.
done this for 10 hours. It's not, but other people couldn't. I could do 15, 16 interviews in a row.
Yeah.
But it's because that is what God has called me to do. How have you seen in your personal life, your spiritual life, when you were able to identify and overcome such adversity like you just mentioned, how has it changed your life and your faith?
Oh, it's changed me in so many ways, Craig. First off, it's just changed my self-belief, because we all have, like I was just mentioning, we have these stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, right? And many times, often, we play them on repeat, unconsciously and consciously, right? And if we're not aware of these stories we tell ourselves, it's going to limit our potential. It's going to limit the decisions we take. We're either going to avoid them or altogether not even think about doing them. And it's going to make us take either the wrong decisions or not take any decision at all, avoiding opportunities, right? Which was my case. And that story is what I built over the years by doing these various activities, doing these hard things, humiliating myself, desensitizing myself, and being okay with looking silly and looking foolish. When you're able to laugh at your mistakes, own your mistakes, share your mistakes, there is a certain power over that. Nobody can have power over you when you're able to own your skeletons in your closets and share them, right? And that's one of the beautiful things. That's how you become free, right? And I've slowly been working my way towards that. It's not easy. Our approach is simple and effective, but it's not easy, right? That's why we gradually increase the stress level and desensitize yourself to the things that you're scared of doing. So in my case, it was always fear of looking silly, fear of looking foolish. Oh, what if they think this? What if they think that? What if I humiliate myself in public, right? And it's freedom, right? On the other side of that fear of humiliation is freedom, because then you can do so many things.
Amen.
Because the one of the things that stops us from doing all the things we want to do is that fear, right? Being in the spotlight, right? Taking on that leadership role, uh, taking on that role where you have to speak up in meetings, right? Conflict, difficult situations, difficult conversations.
That's right. Conflict is one I think I struggle with it. It's
Yeah,
one that we all struggle with. But then you realize when you avoid conflict, so what happens for me, right? I become passive aggressive towards that person. I lash
yeah,
out at them, right? I hold back anger and aggression, or I put people on a pedestal. And then when they don't perform the way that I expected them to perform, I have an issue with them. Instead of
yeah,
identifying my own problem, I should not put people in a situation or make this sort of agreement with them when we've never even had that discussion. But I put them on this pedestal, and then when they don't perform, I'm upset with them. Instead, I should be
yeah,
upset with myself. There's all these things that we need to work on. But like you said, we're constantly growing, we're constantly evolving, we got to constantly work on it. One
yeah,
thing too that I think is a problem, and I think we would all, I mean, you see the increase, especially with depression. Social media is such a problem, especially for our young people and for adults too. We try to perform and create this persona when in the
oh,
end leaves us empty and feeling of inadequacy, depression, fear, how being judged. Have you noticed some of your clients, do they have issues when it comes
oh,
to their
yeah.
their persona on social media?
Yeah, for sure. One of the symptoms that people come with is this chronic self-comparison, right? And how we combat chronic self-comparison, by being too much time on social media or seeing their coworkers do things they would like to do but they're unable to do it, is by challenging themselves, right? Challenge is the antidote to unproductive idleness. Challenge is the antidote to that constant comparison, because you're so focused on getting over your own demons, getting over your own fears, your own anxieties, that it's such a beautiful feeling. I'm sure you can relate, Craig. After you overcome a fear or an important event, and you were feeling so much anxiety and stress, fear, frustration, anger, post event, you almost feel like this sense of invigoration, this sense of this feeling of aliveness, right? And that helps create stillness. That helps create inner peace, right? And so you need to go through these crucibles. You need to go through these challenging journeys. You need to create the experiences for yourself so that you're so focused on yourself that you're not focusing on other people. You change from why are they doing that? Why do they have that? Why don't I have that? To actually being able to have an abundance mindset and being able to say, wow, good for them. Wow, that's inspiring, versus having that comparison mentality. Why do they have that? Or feeling envious, right? So it's a challenge thing, you know. It's for me. I found it's a challenge thing. Is putting myself enough in experiences and challenging myself enough, regardless of how many followers I have. Right, has nothing to do with your follower base, social media.
No, that's a great point. I do. I find myself too, if I see something I don't like, just
Yeah,
unfollow the person, snooze the person. Because if you
yeah,
have those feelings of envy and you're working on where they come from, and you're not able to overcome that envious feeling that you have towards a friend or someone that's on your feed, just unfollow them, because mental health is an important thing. And to be able to talk about it, especially during this month, and to hear, your own struggles and things you were able to overcome, and to really, when we're able to, like, for me, I remember writing my first book. I wrote a few, but it wasn't like it was just that first book. I said I could never do this. This is something that I wasn't capable of doing. I had no experience. But then when I did and I was able to overcome and be so vulnerable and open, I said, okay, what's next? And I was able to pat myself on the back and give myself that sort of that trophy that I guess I always desired. But we're able to overcome so much and accomplish so much if we just really put our minds to it, and don't let fear control us. Don't We have to eliminate that imposter syndrome and not worry about being judged, and really just put ourselves out there. And it's programs like yours that really help people. So if you could, one, tell people directly that are struggling from this, what would you say to them? But also, can you give them a website or a way for them to get in contact with you?
yeah. So people who are dealing with things like procrastination, right? Procrastination, a lot of it has to do with fear in disguise, right? Being a perfectionist, right? When perfection is it's just fear in disguise, right? Because you fear of failing, for example, or you find yourself avoiding opportunities, you find yourself hesitating, overthinking, engaging in self doubt, comparison. These are the type of things that we help people get over, because these are the things that stop people from seizing those opportunities, from taking those bold actions, and taking those opportunities that they deserve, that they're super qualified for, but they just have this anxiety, this barrier, this mental barrier that's stopping them, right? They're super ambitious, but then there's this mental barrier that's getting in the way. And if you have any of that, you can contact me. I have a website, www.trueprogresslab.com/inner fortress, INNEROFORTRESS.
Thank you, Carlos. I'll put it in the chat as well. And I advise
Yeah.
people to reach out to Carlos. I mean, fascinating, especially just from your time in the military to also the lab that you've created. And I think I know a lot of people struggle with whether it's mental health, procrastination, fear, anxiety. And we need to overcome this adversity, because in order for us to really fulfill God's plan for our life, or to be fulfilled, or to be at peace, we need to go through dark places. We need to go through the storm, because on the other side of the storm is the sun. And we need to get through the adversity. And the way we do it is by reaching out to Carlos, especially, and keeping our eyes on the cross. Carlos, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Craig. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Walk in Faith. Always remember, you have the ability to inspire and evangelize through words and actions. God bless you.